very pleased to have with us on the program this man. Well, not the man in the center of your computer screen, the guy with the finger in the face. Mr. Neil Monroe from the Daily Caller is with us. Neil, good evening to you, sir.
Thank you very much for doing this. This is very interesting.
Yeah, that's one word for it. So, I mean, just if you can, walk us through what happened to you yesterday. You're the White House reporter for the Daily Caller, right?
Right, and so Matt Boyle's been writing about the Fast and Furious investigation while the vast majority of the established media outlets are ignoring it. So I mosey on down to the White House for a fairly straightforward press event on counterfeiting and fraud. I line up at the end waiting for Attorney General Holder, hoping to ask him a question politely, in line. He works his way down the line, shaking hands, and he gets to me. I put out my hand, we shake hands, and I introduce myself. And you can hear this online at our site. There's a transcript of this brief conversation. I introduce myself. His press secretary reacts and moves in to try and keep him going. She's saying, "Go on, go on."
As soon as the words "Daily Caller" come out of your mouth,
he turns away to the right as if to move off stage, but he stops. He turns. He points his finger, and then he utters the immortal words, "You need to stop this." And it basically charges us and declares that we have the power to make 50 legislators demand his resignation. It's very impressive. He said, "You guys need to stop this. It's not an organic thing that's happening. You guys are behind it."
Which is, it's really fascinating. We had Matthew Boyle on the show last night talking about this. The idea that the Attorney General of the United States apparently believes that it is improper for journalists to ask politicians, do you think the Attorney General should resign because of the Fast and Furious scandal? Like, that question should not be asked because the answer might be yes.
Yeah, I mean, if he wants to think it himself, fine. It's a free world, it's a free country. But he is the nation's police chief, and it's perhaps a little improper, rude, unethical, out of place for the leading police official to stick his finger in a reporter's face. Now, I called up spokesman for Ashcroft, who, as we all remember, the dark period when Ashcroft and Bush ruled the nation. The media was in full pursuit of Ashcroft for violating civil rights, for expanding police powers. But Ashcroft's guide tells me we would never have done this. We may ask reporters not to reveal national secrets, but we recognize they have the right to do so. Needless to say, the established media was very aggressive against Ashcroft's people, but they're all weirdly silent about Holder's outburst, his directive to the Daily Caller to stop writing about his resignation. The fact that the media critics, the watchdogs, are asleep.
Yeah.
It should tell you something about the nature of what they're interested in.
Well, and let me ask you, Neil, because, I mean, it certainly looks like, based on this picture, that you weren't alone in the room with the Attorney General. I mean, there were other people there. What was the reaction from some of the other White House reporters who witnessed this? Because I haven't seen anybody else write about it.
Well, no, I must confess. When you got the Attorney General's finger in your nose, your attention is focused narrowly on the digit. And so, really, I didn't see the other guys behind me. And by the way, to their credit, the photographers, they're in there taking photographs all day long, and they had their fingers ready, and they got some very nice photographs of this very brief moment. But the other reporters, there was one reporter from a left-of-center site who described the finger pointing as a media criticism by Eric Holder, in effect. And the Politico looked at the issue and described, this demand as merely a plea by the nation's chief law enforcement official. So the media weirdly is not interested in this. I called, there's a reporter named Eric Wemple who works for the Washington Post media. I sent him a note about this the previous night. because frankly, the more fuss and bother on this, it's good for news. He ignored it entirely. Instead, he devoted his Today column about a sex column in a university newspaper being closed down, or Rachel Maddow criticism of somebody else. Trivia. And so, basically, the people who are covering this are the new media. If I may, when I used to work for National Journal. When I worked at National Journal, it was an established publication like many others. And in the established media industry, reporters take their cues from other reporters because the other reporters and editors provide the career track. But I work for the Daily Caller now, and we respond to what you guys ask for, the readers. If the readers are interested in that story, we'll write it. If the readers want more of that story, we'll write it. So we are in a completely different business model. The Internet allows us to recognize what you readers, you great Americans, thank you very much, are out there wanting, and we try and get it for you.
Well, and I'm guessing, Neil, that you're actually seeing that the people do want this story covered. Again, this was I'm guessing a pretty popular story on the Daily Caller website after word of this broke.
A lot of people chimed in with their opinions, and we read those opinions, and we pick and run with stories on some of those opinions. It's very much a two-way street. Absolutely. And even if, we get 3 million visitors every month or so. Now, that's a small percentage, 1% of this great nation. Fine. But we try to give our readers what they want. And so, and as do you serve gun rights enthusiasts, great. But the general established media, who do they serve? They kind of serve each other.
No, I think it's a really good point. In fact, Dave Weigel from Slate, I was kind of surprised to see Weigel offer up his support to Matthew Boyle and to yourself and the Daily Call. Media Matters for America is going after you guys.
And
Weigel says, he says, I see Media Matters giving Holder a huzzah for calling the caller out, but calling it out for what, he asks. Are news organizations not allowed to enterprise stories by asking people whether they think someone should resign? He says news organizations do this all the time. He said the caller's sin, and it's exactly what you were talking about, Neil, the caller's sin seems to be doing it with no backup from the rest of the press. But he says that's just an indictment of the way that calls for resignation hunts work. The polite thing seems to be to wait for a feeding frenzy and be one of many news organizations asking random politicians if X should resign. When Anthony Weiner sends a bunch of women pictures of his, it becomes dignified for reporters to ask his colleagues whether he should quit. Again, nobody was giving the press a hard time for asking, should Anthony Weiner resign?
That was slow to start. He was an important Democrat. But once the images come out, okay, guys, and once the other Democrats backed away from him, it was a feeding frenzy. One of the interesting things about Weigel is he's, roughly speaking, in the same business as us. His professional success is determined by visits to his stories, hits on his site. So he, too, has an incentive to find a niche, find some people who like his opinions and like the information. If he worked for the New York Times, he wouldn't have done anything. The New York Times was silent today on the issue.
Yeah.
And not completely silent. They had a tiny little blurb on it. But, so the new media is allowing the Americans to get more, to demand more from their media in the same way as as weaker political parties allow the Tea Party to grow and allow enthusiastic groups like gun rights people to have a strong influence. It's a wild and confusing set of circumstances, but it's a lot better than having to wait for Mr. Cronkite to decide that, well, yes, this interests me, so I'll let you little people hear what's going on.
Absolutely. Hey, Neil, listen, I can't thank you enough for coming on the program. It was a real pleasure talking with you, and hope we can do this again very soon.
I can never thank Americans enough for being Americans.
Neil Munro joining us from the Daily Caller, White House reporter for that organization.